Hey guys, Zomfox here, and it's time to look at the UFL rulebook, and what rules the UFL should implement. The USFL and XFL rules actually had quite a bit of differences, and it's time to look at exactly what those differences are and which ones the UFL should implement. Now, I was hoping to not make this video because I hoped that we'd actually have the rulebook, but like everything else with the UFL, it's taking a lot longer, and we probably won't have it till February. So without further ado, let's get started looking at the first one in the onside kick alternative. Now, ever since the NFL has found out about how awful kick returns are in terms of player safety and have tried to make it safer, there's been one completely accidental consequence, and that is that onside kicking is pretty much pointless now. It's a sub 10% chance to convert it because of how the rules, and it's pretty much a pointless play, and even as a last-ditch effort, it's just really stupid. So where the USFL and XFL both implemented alternative plays, which are fourth downs. Essentially, you do a fourth down play, and if you convert it, you get to keep the ball. If not, it goes back to the other team. Now, the USFL's one could be used pretty much any time, except you had to be tied or down. And the rule is a 4th and 12 at the 33-yard line of the kicking team. The XFL one is 4th and 15 from the 25-yard line and can only be used in the fourth quarter. Now, these aren't massively different, but naturally, it is still a big difference. The number one thing is that the XFL's is 3 yards longer, and while when you're talking about 4th and 12 to 15, it's not the same as looking at like a 4th and 3 to a 4th and 7. You're talking about a pretty minuscule difference all in all, but it still is a 3 extra yards you have to get. But the big one is where it is. Having it be at the 25 versus the 33 is a big deal. Because for the USFL, you only have to get the ball to the 45 for a first down, whereas the XFL, you have to get it to the 40. And the big difference here is the fact of if you throw an incomplete pass. If you throw an incomplete pass on the USFL one, the other team gets the ball back at the 33-yard line. If you stop them immediately, they got to kick a pretty long field goal over 40 yards. Whereas the XFL side, if you get an incomplete pass and then you stop them on the next 3 plays, they're going to have a sub 40-yard field goal. Essentially, the XFL one, if you fail the 4th and 12 or 4th and 15, you're basically guaranteeing 3 points to the other team. Whereas with the USFL one, you're not necessarily guaranteeing those 3 points. Because of that, and overall being more harsh, I actually think the XFL rule is the better one here. I think that the fact is that this should be a massive penalty for you if you fail it. It shouldn't just be a big deal like the USFL one is. It should be a pretty much you lose the game like the XFL one is. The XFL's is just overall a much better one to have because of its harshness. As when you're talking about getting the ball back after you just scored, it should be a very big risk to do this. So I think the XFL's one is the better option here. Now the next rule is the simplest and easiest to actually decipher. It is the catching inbounds. The USFL, you need 2 feet inbounds. The XFL, you need 1. It's the age-old NFL versus college football catching debate. Now, the fact is, the core goal of this league, aside from naturally surviving, is to see its players go back to the NFL or go on to the NFL. So when you think about it like that, it's obvious. You got to do the USFL rule. It's not even really a debate. I think this is the most obvious of all of them for that reason. Because of the fact that what makes a great receiver from a good receiver and a good to a great is getting 2 feet in bounds. You'll see truly great receivers are able to somehow drag their toes on both feet before going out of bounds, whereas a good receiver will make the catch but only get the 1 foot in bounds. That's a big difference. And all in all, having the 2 feet in bounds rule is the NFL rule. And if you're trying to get players back to the NFL, you have to have the NFL rule in place so that the NFL, scouts and all that can see, hey, this guy can get both feet in bounds. Whereas if you have the 1 foot in bound rule, it's not the same. This one's very obvious. The 2 feet inbound rule is clearly the one that this league should keep. Now, the next one is the extra point options. The extra point options are similar but different at the same time. They both have 3 options, a 1, a 2, and a 3-point attempt. And both their 3-point is the exact same. It's a scrimmage play from the 10-yard line. Now the difference is in the 1 and 2. Now the USFL has a traditional extra point in the sense that you kick the ball with it being snapped at the 15-yard line for 1 point, whereas the XFL is a play from the 2-yard line. Now, the 2-point conversion for the USFL is that scrimmage play from the 2-yard line, whereas the 2-point conversion for the XFL is at the 5-yard line. Now, this one I've seen a lot of people flip-flop on. Originally, most people wanted the XFL, and now people want the USFL. The reason it's pretty simple. Brandon Aubrey has pretty much shown that he is now the poster child for spring football success, going from playing in the USFL the past 2 years to being a first-team AP All-Pro kicker this past season. And a big reason for that is he had a lot of kicking experience with the USFL. Having the extra point is a big deal. It shows that you're able to kick a lot more instead of just kicking a couple field goals in a game. You're also kicking extra points. It helps show just how accurate of a kicker you are. And all in all, the USFL one is the one they have to keep. They just have to. Look, the other big issue with the XFL one especially is that we saw this past season is that almost nobody really went for the 1 point once you got past like halfway through the season. Because like I said earlier about the fourth down difference, when you're talking about a play from the 2-yard or the 5-yard line, it's pretty similar. A halfback dive that'll get you 2 yards would probably get you 5. And same with passing plays. And in fact, having more space in the end zone is actually good for the offense, to where a play at the 5 is arguably easier just because of how much more space you have to throw the ball. So it pretty much just became every team was just doing 2-point conversions. So you never really saw the 3 or the 1 point conversion all that often. Whereas in the USFL, it's like the NFL, except now a 9-point deficit is a 1-possession game. So the USFL rule is the better option here, not just for kickers, but an overall quality of the game. It's the one that the league should use. Now the next one to look at is going to be the running clock. This one is pretty similar. Both these leagues wanted to make these games a lot shorter, make them pretty much guaranteed to be about 3 hours. Now the USFL's rule is a running clock until the final 5 minutes of each half, whereas the XFL is until the final 2 minutes of each half. They should keep the XFL one. Look, if their goal is to make sure these games are only 3 hours, you have to have the one where the running clock has that extra 3 minutes. Really 6 minutes considering it happens twice. It's a very minor difference, but it's a difference that clearly should be for the XFL one. It also just makes more sense for it to be 2 minutes rather than 5. You're not having a 5-minute warning, it's a 2-minute warning. So having the running clock go until the 2-minute warning actually does make a lot of sense. So in this regard, I'd keep the XFL. Now we get to one of the big ones, the kickoff. This one's really controversial. So if you haven't watched the USFL or haven't watched the XFL or haven't watched both, you just listen because the rules are pretty weird. Now the USFL kickoff, the ball is kicked at the 20-yard line. This is much farther back than the NFL kickoff. Now the kicking team's players must be lined up 1 yard behind the ball. Now all players move on the kick of the ball, not before, on the kick. Now the receiving team has to have 8 or 9 players inside the 30 to 40 yard line on the kicking side. And then the touchback would put the ball at the 25-yard line. Whereas an out-of-bounds kick is a much harsher penalty than even the NFL, as an out-of-bounds kick puts it at the 50-yard line. Now, the XFL rule is much more complicated. The ball is kicked from the 30-yard line. Kicking team players line up at the return side 35-yard line. Players move on catch of the ball or 3 seconds after the ball hits the ground. Receiving team players must line up at the 30-yard line of the return side, so a 5-yard difference between them. And then both teams need to have 3 players exact lined up outside the hash marks on each side. Now the ball must be kicked in between the 20-yard line of the return side and the end zone. If the ball is kicked out of bounds or lands outside the 20-yard line, it puts the ball at the kicking team's 45-yard line. Sorry for the typo, it's supposed to say outside of it. Or it's inside the 20 in the sense that it's, if it's short to inside it. You know what I mean? A kick that lands in the end zone directly puts the ball at the 35-yard line of the return side, and a kick that lands in the 20 and then goes out of bounds puts the ball at the return 15-yard line. Yes, the XFL rule is much more complicated. Now, despite what some people will try to make you believe, both these rules are designed with player safety in mind. Hell, the USFL actually made the kickoffs happen more often by going from 25 to 20 in terms of where the ball is kicked because it was proven to be such a safe method. So, I've heard people say that they should keep the XFL purely for safety, which is not a good argument. They're both designed for safety. The bottom line is they need to keep the USFL's one. The USFL kickoff is just the better option. Look, gimmicky is not always a bad word to use, but the XFL kickoff is insanely gimmicky. I wouldn't even really call the extra points that gimmicky when you compare it to this. You're talking about a substantial amount of rules for the kickoff in regards to where the ball has to land that it just really doesn't make any sense. Look, the USFL one is a more traditional kickoff that actually has returns. There's a lot more fun returns, whereas a lot of the XFL ones are pretty similar. As even though there's some technical strategy on lining up players where you do it, in reality, every XFL kickoff felt the exact same, whereas some USFL kickoffs were actually different. And again, the XFL one it feels like it's punishing kickers way too hard. It's supposedly because of, skill for kickers, but isn't it also skill having the power to kick the ball over 80 yards downfield? Because that's the thing with the USFL one. Getting touchbacks shows that you have an insanely strong leg and that you're a huge asset to your team. It's not like the NFL where literally any kicker can get a touchback. In the USFL, you have to have a cannon of a leg to force a touchback. Considering the fact that on average, when players return the ball, they're getting it at around the 40-yard line. Getting a touchback and putting it at the 25 is a big deal, whereas the XFL, it's not the same. Because the odds of a ball hitting in the 20 and then going out of bounds or going to the end zone to get the ball at the 15 is just so rare. And even the other rule of it just landing in the end zone, putting it at the 25, all in all, it's just the USFL one is a much more just eye-appealing play. It's a much better play in practice. And even though there has been talks of the XFL kickoff going to other leagues, there's a reason that it hasn't. Because at the end of the day, it just isn't a good play to watch, and it's not a good play in regards to fans watching. If you're a casual fan, are you going to actually want to hear all these nuances about where does the ball have to land or what happens when it goes out? Or would you rather have it be simple like the USFL one? So, kickoff, USFL one. And then the last one is the Coaches Challenge. Now, it's a bit harder to find the USFL info on this. I'm going based on everything I could find. The only thing I do know is that they only have one challenge. But the booth review and overall reviews review a lot more than the NFL. Essentially, it's used on the same things that it is in the NFL, ball spotting, a touchdown, a turnover. But you can also use it for pass interference, personal fouls, unsportsmanlike conducts, unnecessary roughness. Essentially, the big plays that the replay can actually change. Whereas the XFL, that one challenge, yeah, you see that player that made a false start? You can challenge that. Oh, that guy jumped off sides and you didn't call it? I'm going to challenge that. You can challenge anything with the XFL one. Honestly, I like that. I think they should keep it. This is a big deal. Take, for instance, a few weeks ago with the Denver Broncos late in the season. They had a touchdown that was called back because of a offsides call against one of the offensive linemen, where replay showed he was very much onside. You can't change that. There is no changing an offsides penalty in the NFL. Whereas in the XFL, you could throw a challenge, boom, you get the touchdown. I actually like that. I think that you should be able to challenge anything. I think it's a really cool aspect to have, especially when you're talking about how these leagues, both the USFL and XFL, had the booth review to change a lot of other penalties, like pass interference or unnecessary roughness. I think that all in all, the XFL one is the better one to have. And so what that overall means is I'm pretty much split 3-3. I didn't really mean for it to get here. It's just in regards to which one I say are better. The easiest way to view it is this. In terms of the actual on-the-field rules, I think the USFL clears. I think that the extra point rule, the kickoff rule, and then the catching inbounds are all better for the USFL. Now, while I do think the onside kick alternative is better for the XFL, I think that the XFL succeeded more in the not directly on-the-field production. Essentially, on the sidelines, the challenge was better. The clock, I think the XFL was better. But when you're talking about the rules like the kickoff, the USFL is just such a more simple and effective play, as well as the fact that their extra point rule is much more simple and effective than the XFL's. And the fact that their catching in bounds actually helps players go to the NFL, whereas the XFL's does not, is proof that the USFL rulebook on the field is overall better. But when you're talking about the challenge, being able to challenge anything is a big deal. I think that's a really cool thing the XFL had. And the onside kick alternative, you need it to be a harsh penalty if you fail it. So having a 7-yard difference in where the ball is snapped and a 3-yard difference in how far you have to get, the XFL ones is better. And then the running clock, the XFL, if you want a game to be 3 hours, that extra 6 minutes is a big deal. So overall, that'll do it. Let me know what you guys think down below. Which rules you would have, which of these 6 rules you'd go to the USFL and which to the XFL. Do you agree or disagree? Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We're getting very close to 500 subscribers for the Q&A. And of course, remember the giveaway at 1,000 subscribers. As always, have a great night.